Good morning, and welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Linda Weissgold, former Deputy Director of CIA for Analysis. Before the program begins, first a message from our sponsor, Janes.
Global security continues to grow in complexity, hiding dangers your organization must contain. To combat these complex threats, you need trusted intelligence quickly. With 77 million data points and growing, verified by a global team of specialist expert analysts with international military experience. Our assured open source foundational military intelligence is accessible within your existing system and fully interconnected through our unique solution, INSA, supplying your organization the power to dive in and rapidly retrieve all vital intelligence through any pathway, and the ability to fuse and enrich other data sources enables a single intelligence environment, giving you faster access to quality data for mission users, securing assets, and supporting your strategic decisions. Janes, the OSINT agency.
Now, please welcome INSA Vice President for Policy, Bishop Garrison.
Good morning, and welcome to our final program of the calendar year. This morning, we are pleased to host one of the community's top leaders for the first in our three-part series, The Future of Open Source Intelligence, sponsored by Janes. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, and we hope you do, please submit them through the questions box on the right side of your screen. We have over 700 registrants for today's program, so I will do my best to get to as many questions as possible. We are pleased to welcome members of the press for this call as well. This is a reminder that this is on the record and being recorded. And finally, I would like to thank our host sponsor, Janes, for their support of this program. We could not deliver this kind of thought leadership without the support of our sponsor partners. And to that end, here to introduce our speaker is Sam Gordy, President of Janes US. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Bishop, and thank you, INSA, for holding this series. You know, when INSA first approached Janes and asked if we were interested in sponsoring an OSINT-related coffee and conversation, it was a very easy decision. I think the decision was made before they even finished the verbal ask. Janes has been in the open source arena, you know, over 125 years, going back to 1898 when Fred Janes, I'll say a capital ship enthusiast, first launched all the world's fighting ships. All the world's aircraft followed in 1909, and so on. So for 115 of those 125 years, we really thought of ourselves as a publishing company. But 10 years ago, we went through this great introspection, and from that we emerged as the open source, you know, agency that we look at ourselves today. That completely fundamentally changed everything about how we're organized, how we do our business, and really formalized a lot of processes and tradecraft that had been informally done in the past. Today we're focused on foundational current strategic intelligence on a global scale, 197 countries around the world. So very, very happy to be engaged in this process. And of course, my pleasure to welcome our guest speaker, Linda Weissgold. Most importantly, Linda serves on my Janes National Security Board of Advisors. So she is guiding where we go as a company and what we do from a tradecraft perspective. Of course, prior to that august role, she was former Deputy Director of CIA for Analysis. In that role, she was responsible for the quality of all source analysis delivered by CIA and for all the professional development and tradecraft of the officers who produced it. 37-year career with CIA, in which case Linda was part of the creation, delivery of intelligence analysis on a great variety of issues. She was an analyst focused in on the Middle East, Post 9/11, she was the person volunteered for counterterrorism assignments, and of course that occupied a great portion of her career. During the course of all that, we have the world becoming a more complex place with rising China, resurgent Russia, and so forth. Skilled communicator, experienced in the cover of both urgent and controversial issues, proven teacher, proven leader, champion of analytical tradecraft, integrity of the analysis, and objectivity. So with great pleasure, we welcome Linda to this series. Bishop, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Sam. And Linda, if you're there, I think we may have a small technical difficulty. There we go. We've got her on board now. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam. We really appreciate your leadership there, and we appreciate the support of Jan. So, Linda, thank you so much for joining us. Happy holidays to you. We know it's a busy time of year, so we're really thankful to have you on and to really hear about some of your expertise and experiences with the agency. So, to kick us off, let's start off by discussing your most recent role as Deputy Director of CIA for Analysis and how it shaped your perspective about the future of open source intelligence and the analytic tradecraft and tools that go along with it.
Thank you so much, Bishop, and to INSA for giving me this platform to speak, and to Jane's as well. It's a pleasure to be associated with such a great company. So I'm always a little hesitant when after I hear someone give my my bio, I feel like, wow, I'm tired now after having heard it. Now I know why I retired. But my last position at CIA, as was mentioned, was being the Deputy Director for Analysis, and I held that job for about 3 years. And prior to that, I was a deputy in that office for about 4 years. So I spent about the last 7 years or so being responsible for all of CIA's analysis, as well as the development of the officers that produce it. And, when you get that kind of broad look at the world, there are some things that you think about. But when it comes to open source, what I would say is that open source has always been an integral part of CIA's analysis. Sam gave a bit of the history for Jane's. I would just start by saying open source, or OSINT, really started in many ways with the Foreign Broadcast Information Service, and that was created as a part of CIA. So CIA analysts, though, are all source analysts, and that means that they're using both classified and unclassified material to deliver objective analysis to what I like to think are some of the busiest people and some of the most important people in the world. So the difference, though, is that now, in those 7 years that I was in the Director of Analysis front office, we have more open source information than ever before. And that is both a plus and a minus. I think the plus is obvious. The minus, of course, is that it's now becoming increasingly difficult to find the right information. Some people like to talk about it as being, finding a needle in a haystack. Others talk about it as finding a needle in a whole bunch of haystacks now, make it even more complicated. I do think it's important, though, to talk about the fact that clandestinely collected information is still going to be needed. And that is also, I just want to get that out there as part of this discussion, because the territory of intelligence analysis is often the deliberately hidden. And open source information can give us a lot, but that deliberately hidden piece of information, clandestinely collected information, is still going to always be important. I think another point I just want to make, that kind of an observation from my time working as Director of Analysis, is that good analysis isn't the same as reporting. Good analysis creates new insights that give policymakers and warfighters new ways to think about dangers and opportunities in the world, not just about what happened, but what are the implications of that. So, and it's not only developed through the information and the sources itself, it's developed through the expertise and the tradecraft of the analysts who are producing it. So expertise, I like to think of as helping to sort through those mountains of data and helping the analyst to ask the right questions about what's missing, what more do we need to know, where can we go look for it. And the tradecraft I like to think about as what helps us with the objectivity and why a policymaker should believe what CIA analysts are saying. It boils down to being able to explain why you think what you think. And so I'll stop there so that we have time for lots more stuff.
And that is fantastic. And when you talk about the deliberately hidden type of information, I think that really goes into the kind of the duality here of what we're talking about whenever we're speaking about OSINT, which would, you know, be the open source side of this too. So recently, and as the audience just saw, INSA, with the support and partnership of James, recently released a video to help viewers understand the power, the scope, the potential of open source intelligence overall. So just from your own experiences, as you talk about these, whether it's clandestine or it's open source, the different types of intelligence gathered, how are analysts using open source intelligence in their activities?
Absolutely. So first off, if people haven't had a chance to watch the video, I highly recommend that they do. And one of the key things I think is important about it is it sets a really good baseline for what we're really talking about when we talk about OSINT. I think there are a lot of definitions floating around out there, and so just having a common ground and common understanding is important. As I mentioned, for me, when I think about OSINT, it started with Foreign Broadcast Information Service and with translations. It also included academic studies, but now OSINT is really it's news on all platforms, including social media. It's commercial satellite information. It's video and it's images that have, you know, date timestamps on it, and there's a whole lot more to it. And so I think that video is really a good reminder as well of the importance of having the public trust when it comes to privacy and open source information. And so we can talk a little bit more about that if you like later on. But getting back to your question about how analysts are using open source information, look, they're using it in all the ways that you would anticipate. So from identifying leading indicators to tracking breaking news and events that are happening around the world. For example, when Russian soldiers were first staging to move into Ukraine, you know, the selfies that they were taking helped to establish locations and equipment that they were bringing with them. Before that, information on what was then called Twitter was providing a great deal of, you know, firsthand accounts of Syrian CBW attacks. So again, there's just a lot out there that now I think constitutes open source and the way people are using it. Some things people might not think about. Open source helps analysts in the intelligence community to guide clandestine collection. If something is available openly, we shouldn't be risking human lives to go out and clandestinely collect that information. So I think we need to understand the universe of what's available before we send someone out and put people at risk. Also, open source information is a great way to try and verify what an asset might tell you or what might be collected in signals intelligence. It can give you a verification capability. I think it's also important, and something people may not think about when they talk about OSINT, is it's not just what's out there, it's also what isn't out there that's important. So tracking, for example, what's being censored in a country is a really good sign of what those leaders consider to be their vulnerabilities. Just a couple other things. One last thing I guess I would say, or maybe two. One is that open source also helps analysts to check their own thinking. So there is a lot of amazing work out there, as I mentioned, whether it be academia or think tanks or others. And one of the most important questions that an intelligence analyst can ask themselves is, how might I be wrong? And that requires humility and openness to others' ideas. And you can find a lot of those other ideas to test yourself in open source. And then just one last thing while I think about it, going back to the video for a second. It highlighted the need for collaboration with the private sector and the intelligence community. And I think that's really important. I couldn't agree more. But one thing I kind of wish had been highlighted just a little bit is that I think when people hear open source, they think it's a free good, and it's not. There are some real major budgetary issues that and implications for the intelligence community that are coming with all of the new open source information and the technology that's going to be needed to exploit it. I was thinking about this and after I watched the video, and I was thinking that it's going to make us, I think, long for the days when I was an analyst that you were kind of looking under the budgetary couch cushions for some, spare change to keep the subscriptions going on newspapers or on, something great like Jane's Defense Weekly. But now we're going to have this, open access to new sources of information. And as I said, trying new technology that may not pan out, it's going to get expensive. And I just want people to think about that a little bit too.
You've given us a wide variety of topics and pieces within the overall umbrella of open source to think about. And one that really resonated with me when you talk about trust. It wasn't simply trust between public and private sector or individuals and the government. You were even talking about using it against the guardrails of checking your own information, trusting yourself, making sure that your information is as accurate and correct as you can provide it with for a young analyst out there. So in terms of trust, when we talk about OSINT and integration and its use into the overall intelligence collection and analytical framework tradecraft for the agencies, what are some of the challenges in guarding against things like misinformation and disinformation in this context? You mentioned Russian soldiers and their locations. I think using it for analysis of conflicts makes it a very powerful tool. So what are some of the challenges against that misinformation disinformation fight?
Sure. Analytic tradecraft has always had to account for misinformation and for disinformation. It's not something new. The difference is that now tech is making it a whole lot easier to produce this kind of disinformation, and it's also making it more difficult to detect. So the CIA analytic tradecraft that I grew up with and that we continue to teach, and also throughout the rest of the IC, it touches on some of those guardrails, as you were mentioning, this idea on how to think critically, how to weigh raw information that is often contradictory and it's always incomplete, how to assemble and to test arguments, including coordination and collaboration to test yourself. And all of this same tradecraft applies to OSINT. During my 37 years at the agency, the tools and the techniques that we used may have evolved, as you would have expected. Nothing makes you feel older than at one point, I swear it was my computer, but one of the first computers I worked on was in the CIA museum. But
things are very distinguished. That's it.
But I think it's this idea that I'll just look back as well. When I retired, I looked through all of my performance reviews. It's one of those things you get to do when you retire. And I laughed because I was praised as an early adopter of the internet for research, right? So,
wow.
So like I said, the tools have changed, but now we have groups of data scientists and there's AI to help navigate the oceans of data without drowning in it. But like I said, the basic principles aren't new. So among those principles, some other things to think about is you need to purposefully look for disconfirming information. CIA learned the hard way in the Iraq War about relying too heavily on one source wonders, as I like to call them, and the dangers of groupthink. So you need to think about when you read something, what isn't there that should be? Or is the report purposely trying to evoke some sort of emotional response rather than try and inform you? I guess the last thing I'll just say, you can't be thin-skinned when you are trying to be an analyst. You can't be thin-skinned about people asking you questions or doubting your conclusions. Pushback and controversy, I like to think of, are the occasional price of relevance and impact. So you have to have the integrity to defend your judgments and the flexibility and the humility to change them when new information dictates. And if you have those kinds of qualities, which are some of the things that CIA looks for in its analysts, it can help you to be open to the idea that something you're reading may be misinformation or disinformation.
I think you're definitely hitting the nail on the head here, and you made a very important point when you talked about some of the technologies that we've used in the past, being able to see the curve ahead of you and utilizing the internet early in your career at CIA. What we're seeing today is the continued evolution of these types of tools, and particularly one, it is the word of the day, and it's something I think a lot of our viewers are probably just waiting us to talk about, but generative AI, generative artificial intelligence. So we know that these types of technologies, they're designed to give analysts better access to the open source data to help aggregate it and give it some clarity, as we were discussing. But can you provide some more insights into how something, or how you see something like generative AI tools enhancing the overall open source data analysis process, and how you foresee this capability benefiting analysis in terms of both efficiency and accuracy?
Sure. So, one of the very first webinars that I did while I was still the Deputy Director for Analysis was an INSA coffee, just like this one. And ChatGPT had just emerged on the scene. And so I was asked a question on the role of AI in analysis. And I responded that I didn't didn't envision, if you will, AI replacing analysts anytime soon. And I still don't. So, by the way, that day, the next morning, I was driving into work, and it was the first time I ever heard my voice on the radio because someone had picked up.
It's a strange feeling.
Very strange. I almost drove off the road. But when I got into work that day, I will say I was very popular with the analysts because I had said that I didn't see that, it was going to be replacing them. But I still think this is the case. And the reason I say that is because the models that we have, they can't explain why it thinks what it thinks. And much of what generative AI is producing is a reflection of unknowns at this point, right? It's not clear what the universe of information is that it's searching. We don't know what the programmer's parameters and their biases are. And so what I said then, and I still think is really applicable now, is, I was at one point President Bush's intelligence briefer. And I can't imagine going in and telling a president in response to a question on why are you saying this? Well, I don't know because the black box just told me so. That's never going to be acceptable. I have to be able to explain why the intelligence community thinks what it thinks. But since you're going to give me a do-over, I'm going to have a little bit more nuanced answer on this question, I hope. And that is that, I think generative AI, it's an analytic tool. It's not a substitute for analysts. It's already, though, helping analysts in the intelligence community find relative information out of those mountains of irrelevant data that's out there. It's double checking that information hasn't been missed. I always dreaded when we were largely using paper files that there was going to always be something found in some safe or a folder somewhere after publication that would have been relevant. Now we have tools where we can check to say, you've been reading this, did you see this information out there? I kind of call it like the Amazon of, you've been looking at these purses, how about these shoes, kind of thought. It's also providing an alert function. Information is happening around the globe 24 hours a day. Analysts can't be at their desk 24 hours a day. So AI is already being used to point, something out. You might want to come in and look, whether it be on the classified or the unclassified systems. It's also helping with remarkable visualization capabilities. It's automating some of the drudgery of routine functions of plotting, like, locations of where a unit might be on a map or something along those lines, or where there's reports of fighting. But eventually what I would like to see AI get to is a capability to point out insights that the analysts don't see. Things like, track and tell me that this is the first time something's happened, or this only happens when X occurs in the world, or those kinds of things that are hard for analysts to kind of keep in their brain or to identify. Intelligence failures usually include three elements in my experience, and those are there's some element of collection failure, some element of a policy decision, and also some element of the human difficulty in seeing discontinuities. And what I would love is for AI to help us in that last challenge. So I'll stop there.
No, this is fantastic. So I kind of want to weave one more question in on this, because you spoke about that analysts will have the ability to differentiate between basically reliable open source information and false information, false narratives. Given the age of social media that we find ourselves in, rapidly evolving overall digital landscape, what about the how? How will they be able to differentiate? What strategies can be employed to ensure the accuracy of that open source information?
Yeah, this is a tough one, Bishop, and it isn't a problem just for analysts. As you mentioned, it's a problem for all of us who are reading open source, and I really think it's going to take work from both the producers of open source information and the consumers of open source information to tackle this. There are increasing information silos that are growing every day, and they are fragmenting people and nations along national, cultural, and political preferences. I think one of the most depressing polls that I came across not that long ago was actually one from a Pew poll from 2022 that said that Americans between the ages of 18 and 29 are almost as likely to trust social media as national news outlets. And when you think about that, yeah, that there even if there is some intentional effort to try and, or if there isn't an effort to intentionally distort news on social media, there certainly isn't a whole lot of vetting of information going on a lot of social media sites. And those 18 to 29-year-olds aren't demanding accountability from their information sources. So I don't have all the answers, but I would say that first and foremost, analysts in particular need to both look critically at sources as well as have an open mind about sources. You can't just say, I'm not going to look at this universe of information because in the past it's been wrong. So they need to try and use their expertise and their experience to try and validate information. As I said, one of the best examples I think of saying you can't just discard information are tabloids. Some of the narratives in them are going to be false, but oftentimes they're true. In 1998, the Drudge Report was, the gossip and news aggregator site, was the first one to break the Monica Lewinsky story. In 2005, 9 years before any other publication talked about Bill Cosby and allegations from women against him, the National Enquirer ran a story on this. And, I'm not saying I go to the grocery store and think, wow, look, Elvis is really alive. But I do think you have to, analysts in particular, have to run down all leads. They can't just discount something. So the best way I think to do that is to figure out what the original source of information is. Try and dig as far back as you can into the pile to find out where it's coming from. One of the things I also realized when I retired from CIA is that I don't apparently read the news like the average American. I'm always asking questions about what isn't in the piece. I'm questioning the source. I'm comparing it to what other outlets have said. I purposely switch channels between cable news networks just to hear what the other side of how something might be presented so I can challenge my thinking. And I question the idea of, mirror imaging, making sure that I'm not looking at things just through my own prism. So all that has kind of become second nature to me now, that critical evaluation of information. We have to figure out a way for that to become second nature to all consumers of public information. I do think technology is going to be part of the solution. As I said, it was part of the problem, but it's also going to be part of the solution. Tools are going to become much more widely available for people to help, for example, see if a photo's been altered, but people are going to have to use them. And that takes a little effort on their part. So, I think that this is going to be a challenge for our time. But I do think there are ways we can think about this if we all come at it together and, as I said, demand accountability of our news sources.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. Yeah. Before we move over to our audience questions, I had one last one for you, because you mentioned an ability to tear down silos, and it really goes back in some degrees to overall trust and transparency as it relates to the IC and just the way we take in this information, the way they utilize it. So how does the declassification of public and the public release, of sensitive intelligence, especially compared to things like open source intelligence, influence public perception and trust in the government's actions, and just the overall mobilization of public support in modern conflicts, as we discussed earlier? What ethical considerations should be weighed when sharing OSINT derived information with the public to ensure responsible and transparent intelligence sharing?
Yeah, going back to the video that we were talking about, the Jane sponsored video, it poses a question: is anything still secret? And when I saw that, I thought, yes, and it needs to be. I think at one point I saw a quote that the head of the Chinese intelligence service, the MSS, said that he gets 80% of his information from open source. And I hope that's true. I actually would love to be 100% of his information is coming from open source and that there's no clandestine. But, declassification is a really powerful tool because it doesn't happen often. And each time it does, it requires weighing really carefully the potential of the loss of intelligence sources and capabilities. Will we go blind because that capability is lost, or are there other ways to compensate it? But I think you're right. Your question you asked is really a question about trust and about public trust. So that release of information, that declassification, it's only powerful if the U.S. citizenry or our intelligence partners around the world believe in the objectivity of the intelligence that's being declassified. And I think that's key. I used to talk about the fact that as an analyst at CIA, that you rely on three kinds of privileged access to do your job. The first is the access to the time and thinking and the goals of our country's leaders. The second is this access to a range of both classified and unclassified information to develop the new insights. And the third is CIA's reputation, because reputation is what gets you a chance to be heard. And all of those are grants of trust. They're not grants of power. So you have to be careful about them. And let's be honest, public trust in the intelligence community needs to be strengthened. It is the American public, for some reason, seems more comfortable giving access to their private information to corporate America than they do to the U.S. government. Having Alexa or Siri on in your house all the time, but yet unwilling to have the U.S. government, a lack of trust in what we might use. So this is actually one of the reasons that now that I can in retirement speak to the American public directly, I want to, because I'm trying to figure out ways to engender that trust and to help the American public understand what intelligence analysts can and can't be expected to do, that they're not going to be infallible. This is a human endeavor. And so I think that, I'll just finish with one last thing. I tell my son this, that trust takes a lifetime to earn and a moment to lose. And I think that when you're thinking about declassification and all of that, that's a really big part of this. If nobody trusts what we say, it doesn't matter if it's declassified. If they think that it's being done in a political context, it doesn't matter, even if it's the best intelligence out there.
Absolutely. No, thank you. That's a great way for us to segue into really the first question. Is kind of we've combined a few questions. We've seen some similar ones asking the same thing, but ultimately, can you tell us from your own experiences what makes for a good young analyst within the IC?
Absolutely. I understand there's a number of students on today. And that makes me really happy, because I do think it's really important that there are still interest from students in joining the intelligence community. You mentioned, or I think Sam mentioned at the beginning of this, the world is becoming increasingly complicated. It's a dangerous place, and we need really gifted people to join the intelligence community. For me, I always think about it as a combination of a couple of things. It's the tradecraft that I mentioned earlier, and the values that people bring to the job that really make good analysts. By the tradecraft, I mentioned it's that ability to weigh information and think critically and objectively. But I think from the values, some of there's a good analyst has to have intellectual curiosity. You have to be someone who wants to get to the bottom of things and is always asking questions. You have to be a continuous learner. Our adversaries are continuous learners. We have to be as well. There has to be a bias for action. A lot of the value of intelligence work comes from not only what you tell someone and tell a policymaker, but when you tell them. Telling the President of the United States something after he's already made a decision isn't really helpful. So getting something out there, and it can be actually less than helpful. So getting that information out in a timely manner. And then I guess the last thing I would say, two other ones, teamwork. Nothing that comes out of the intelligence community is the viewpoint of one person. It's a corporate product. That means that it's been tested and pushed and, you know, all kinds of different things. And you have to be up for that kind of a teamwork approach to things. And then finally, you have to understand that being in the intelligence community means that you are informing policy, you're not making policy. And so if that's a big one, where I think if people don't understand that when they're coming in, they may be uncomfortable being in the intelligence community. And look, there's lots of ways to serve your country, but you have to realize that you're going to inform, and there are going to be decisions that you personally may not agree with, but your personal views aside, you're there to support the institutions of the United States. So.
That's fantastic. So again, on this theme of ethics and trust and character as it relates to the work, one question we had was from Mr. Larry Thompson. Would teaching disinformation tradecraft analysis in school be beneficial?
Absolutely. There are some books out there already that are geared towards teenagers. And I'm thrilled about that, on kind of how to have them. A former analyst from the agency, when she left the agency, she wrote a book that was geared towards high school kids and helping them to think it through with advertisements and other ways to think about disinformation. So I do think that that's something that's going to have to be, as I said, taught early. And we're not looking at that now. So yes, I would encourage it, and I'd be happy to be a part of any efforts to do so.
Fantastic. So, excuse me, another one from Elka Rodriguez, Florida. She asked, what was your biggest challenge as the head of analysis for CIA?
That's a great question. And hi, Elka. It's you know a lot of the challenges that we had while working together years ago. You know, I think that there are a lot of them out there, of course. Every job is challenging. I think that for me, I'll raise a couple of things. One, CIA analysts are covering the world and are always going to have to be having a global coverage approach to the world. So that allocating resource and the balance of making sure that you have put enough resources on emerging threats or on the hot topics, whether it be China, Russia, war breaks out somewhere, that you can surge, but at the same time, you're not neglecting issues or topics that can come up and bite in the future. So finding that way to maintain global coverage in a time when it's not just the analysts that are having to balance that, but also the collectors. And I found that open source, bringing it back to the topic of the day, that was a huge part of how we can compensate for that. So while understandably collectors may be moving towards what is called in the parlance a priority one topic, making sure that we were helping the folks in the open source enterprise and other places continue to focus on what was happening in the world and covering that, so that if something were to pop up in a, pick your country that may be a lower priority at this point, that we had those resources. So I think that resource allocation. And then the other thing is making sure analysis really is a business about people. And so taking care of the people was always a high priority for me.
Fantastic. And at the end of the day, that's but for a lot of organizations, that tends to be the bottom line. Like, how are you taking care of people? What type of manager, what type are you, and what type of culture and environment are you trying to build?
It's so true. And I was the head of the directorate during COVID. That brought its own challenges of making sure that we were taking care of people. But I do think that idea of making sure that you are appreciating and giving them opportunities for development, and as I said, that continuous learning, you have to walk the walk. You can't just talk the talk.
So let's go back to those creating new opportunities, for instance. I know this, in some regards, this tends to be a little bit of a third rail for the IC right now, but some observers have noted, and this is another question from the audience, they've noted that perhaps we need to create a new agency that is exclusively tasked with the collection and leveraging the use of OSINT. Do you have thoughts on that?
Oh, I have thoughts on that. But I'll keep them short, and that is, I don't support that idea. And here's why. I believe that, as I said earlier, that analysis is about developing new insight. And in order to do that, I think the analysts themselves need to be the ones, the term I often use is to wallow in that data, to discover something new. And the idea of an independent open source agency actually feels like we're moving backwards. It feels like, going back to what I talked about, kind of my early days as an analyst, prior to our ability to do the research ourselves, if you were going to write a paper, you would go down to the library at CIA, and you would say to the folks down there, librarians, hi, I'm going to write a paper on whatever topic. And they would say, okay, come back in a couple days and I'll give you some information. And you'd come back and they would give you this stack of stuff to look at that they had curated. And I had no idea what was on the cutting room floor. I don't know what things would have sparked some new thought in my brain. And this idea of someone curating the open source information and giving it to the analyst feels like that to me. It feels like a step backwards. Instead, what I would like is the democratization of the data and the tools throughout the intelligence community, so that analysts, as I said, have the ability themselves to really look through that, because that trained eye, the expertise they have, that's where they're going to find something new. And we found that at CIA when we were starting to give more and more analysts access to the same kind of tools that our open source officers had, they were finding all kinds of really interesting insight that they hadn't seen before.
That's fantastic. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Linda, for joining us. This has been an absolutely dynamic conversation. We're very thankful. Do you have any closing thoughts that you would like to share here with the audience?
First off, I just want to say thank you again for this opportunity. I think this is a fantastic series. I look forward to the subsequent series that are coming on open source. And thank you to Janes for sponsoring this. And I think I would just like to say, my hope is that we will find ways to leverage open source together with the private sector in the most valuable and beneficial ways, and that, as was mentioned earlier, we're going to find ways as well to cope with some of the dangers that are out there as a result. So these kinds of conversations, I think, are going to be an important start.
Thank you so much again. Again, I too would like to thank James for sponsoring this morning's discussion, and to all of you watching, happy holidays. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us as well. When the webinar ends, there will be a short survey that pops up. Please take a few moments to complete it and let us know how we're doing. Let us know how we can improve and what else you would like to see in the future. Quickly looking ahead into the new year. On February 7th, we will resume in-person programming with our Zero Trust with Zero Budget breakfast and panel discussion. That will be with NSA Technical Director Neil Ziering, Air Force Research Laboratory CIO Alexis Bonnell, and Intel Corporation's Federal CTO Steve Oren. And they will discuss how to leverage current capabilities in your IT architecture to align with Zero Trust principles. And then next on Thursday, February 15th, we will hold our annual Charlie Allen Achievement Award ceremony at the Army-Navy Country Club in Arlington, Virginia. Now in its 14th year, these awards spotlight the outstanding work being done by the early to mid-career professionals across our community. NGA Deputy Director Tanya Wilkerson, will be the keynote speaker celebrating the evening. I promise that you will walk away with a renewed sense of the purpose and commitment to our national security mission. And finally, we recently released our 2023 annual report. This publication showcases the work we do to bring together the public, private, and academic sectors to build relationships, share ideas, and advance novel ideas and insights to tackle the most pressing national security challenges of our day. You can find it on our website. Please take a few moments to review it and learn how you can get more involved with INSA in the year ahead. You can learn more about all of this on our website, www.insaonline.org. This concludes this morning's programming. On behalf of our INSA team, we wish you a happy and healthy holiday season. Thank you for being such an integral part of our journey this year. Here's to new beginnings and continued successes in the new year. Thanks all.